statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Fletcher, here you are again. You come to this council with your cameras, delivering dramatic briefings about Gaza. You criticize Israel, but you can barely bring yourself to mention Hamas. Why? Why? Why is it so difficult for you to say their name? I think only at the end of your speech, you barely mention it. In a briefing that lasted nearly 1,500 words, you didn't have the decency to tell this council the truth about the greatest obstacle to Gaza's recovery. And you can check your speeches, Mr. Mansour and Madam President, representative from Russia. How many times do you mention Hamas in your speeches? Nada. Zero. And you know exactly who is to blame. And Mr. Fletcher, I invite you to go back to read your interviews, your speeches, and count how many times you mention Israel and you put the blame on us, and how many times you even mention the existence of Hamas, the problems of Hamas. Your bias is written in your own words. Madam President, assistance is needed in Gaza. Israel knows this. Israel is acting on it. But this council must also deal with the facts. Today, some members have accused Israel of preventing humanitarian aid from flowing into Gaza. That is false. It is a lie. Israel is coordinating the entry of 600 trucks a day into Gaza under the existing agreements. Between 70% and 80% of those trucks carry food. More than 22,000 pallets of water, sanitation, and hygiene supplies have come into Gaza, including dual use that you mentioned. Since the ceasefire began, 16,500 tons of medical supplies have been delivered. Through coordination with the United Arab Emirates, equipment was also delivered for the new Emirati clinic in Khan Yunis. This clinic is expected to treat more than 500 Palestinians a day. Just yesterday, additional humanitarian convoys carried hundreds of tents and mattresses into Gaza. These are not the facts of a country blocking aid. These are the facts of Israel facilitating aid while trying to stop Hamas from exploiting it. There is another fact that this council must confront. In recent months, the volume of aid brought in by UN agencies has declined dramatically. Today, the UN, they are responsible for less than a third of the trucks entering Gaza. The rest are private sector commercial trucks. Why is that? Not because Israel blocked them or we're telling the UN not to bring more aid. The international organizations themselves have pointed to us that they have their own operational constraints, like rising transport and logistic costs. So do not blame Israel for problems that are not our fault. Some members of this council have pointed to temporary disruptions at crossings as evidence that Israel is restricting humanitarian aid. That is simply not the case. When Israel temporarily restricts activity at a specific crossing, it does so because of a real security concerns. We are doing everything possible to ensure that humanitarian routes remain humanitarian routes and are not exploited by terrorists. That is not opposition to aid. It is just common sense. And that's why we continue to open the checkpoints. We have also heard criticism that Israel restricts international NGOs. So let me answer that directly. We asked the NGOs to register. Most of them did. Most of the aid comes through this NGO. And Israel welcomes legitimate humanitarian organizations. Every day we are working productively with over 30 of them. But we will not give a free pass to organizations that shelter terrorists behind a humanitarian logo. Look at what happened this week at this building. UNRWA fired 70 employees in Gaza. 70 in one day. UNRWA said the dismissals were necessary to, and I quote, mitigate safety and security risks. Safety and security risks. I ask you, Mr. Fletcher, maybe you can explain to us. It's not clear. Were these employees fired because they were not working hard enough? Were they fired because they were not meeting their targets? Or were they fired because there is terrorist infiltration inside UNRWA that can no longer be denied? USAID identified more than 100 UNRWA employees with ties to Hamas. UNRWA fired only 70. What happened to the rest? Are they still employed? Are they still operating under the UN flag, working for Hamas? For years, we warned this council that Hamas had infiltrated humanitarian institutions in Gaza. For years, we were told there was no problem. Israel will continue to work with humanitarian organizations that deliver aid to civilians, but we will not cooperate with organizations that allow terrorists to hide behind a humanitarian logo. Council members, Hamas wants this debate to stay frozen on aid, and it worked. Look, all of you focused on the aid. Not because they care about Gazans, because Hamas is using aid to escape international pressure. Hamas wants this council to talk about trucks, but not weapons, crossings, but not tunnels, about us, about Israel, but not Hamas. Why? Because they know the truth. Reconstruction in Gaza cannot begin while they remain armed. If Hamas is still collecting taxes, terrorizing Gazans, and using the ceasefire to rebuild its power, then Gaza cannot recover. Madam President, Hamas says Israel has not implemented phase 1 of Trump's 20-point peace plan. That is another lie. Hamas says Israel is violating the ceasefire. That is a lie. When Hamas violates the ceasefire, Israel acts to protect itself. Hamas says Israel must withdraw first before Hamas disarms. That is also a lie. And I heard the representative from Russia, the different one who spoke before me. And she said, it doesn't matter, the sequence. It matters. It matters. Because there is a resolution of the Security Council. There is an agreement. And there is the plan of President Trump, the 20-point plan, that was adopted by the Security Council Resolution 2803. Maybe you forgot about it. We didn't forget about it. And here is the resolution. And let me remind you what this council adopted on the 17th of November last year. It says, and let me quote directly, that Hamas and other armed groups will have no role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly. That Hamas's military and terror infrastructure will be destroyed and not rebuilt. That its weapons will be placed permanently beyond use. That IDF withdrawal is linked to standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization. That is a sentence Hamas wants you to ignore. Withdrawal is linked to demilitarization, not before, not instead. That is not something that Israel has just made up. That is a text you adopted. That is a condition for phase 2. Last month, Mr. Danon came to this council and urged this council, and I quote him, to use every means at its disposal to urge Hamas to accept the roadmap without further delay. It didn't ask you to urge Israel, to urge Hamas, because we are complying with the agreement. The roadmap exists. The obstacle is Hamas. The question is whether this council is prepared to pressure Hamas to accept it. To members of this council who are repeating Hamas propaganda, ignoring the Board of Peace report, and blaming Israel, wake up. Do not let Hamas write your talking points. Now is the test. Because when the resolution was adopted, you all spoke about it. But now is the time to enforce it. Resolution 2803 was adopted with 13 votes in favor and not a single vote against. The United States supported it, European countries supported it, many other countries, Arab and Muslim partners supported the plan. This very council endorsed it. So if this council cannot demand that a terrorist organization comply with its own resolution, then what is the value of the debate? If Hamas refuses to disarm and still receives political cover here in this room, then diplomacy is meaningless. Not weakened, not delayed, just meaningless. Thank you, Madam President.